my earliest memory of doing anything to do with peace was when I must have been about 8 or 9 years old in the 1950s, when my parents were doing door-to-door collections on the Stockholm Peace Appeal, which was an appeal to the United Nations in the post-war period and so on. And I went with them, and I have memories, sort of holding my mother's hand and while she knocked at the door and talked to people. And it was an interesting period. I mean, it was Cold War period. But there was a lot of sympathy even then amongst ordinary people, and this was in London. Amongst ordinary people in London, a lot of sympathy for the idea of peace and the United Nations doing something concrete about peace. Not surprising, of course, because we were only, 5 years after the end of the Second World War and everything that meant to particularly my parents' generation. The catalysts, I think it's hard. I think I just grew up with it, that it was something that was really massively important. You couldn't achieve any kind of social justice in any other kind of area if there was the threat of war or actual war, because it took so much money, it took so many human resources, it involved so much destruction that you had to do something about that, whatever else you might be concerned about. And so I've always been either very much involved or on the edge of the peace movement all my life. I did my PhD on the land rights struggle of the Gurindji at Dagorago in the Northern Territory. And that was really my first engagement with the Aboriginal struggle in this country. And I came here from Europe to do that research. It was an amazing period to live in the bush for 12 months coming from Europe. It was an amazing shock to the system. I learned a number of things. I learned how sophisticated the Gurindji were in sort of supporting me and dealing with me and using me when they wanted to do things. And it was done, by who gave me the instructions. Was it an uncle or was it one of the old men? Was I called by my English name or the Gurindji name they gave me? So I got a feeling that you must look behind what people are doing, that things that seem apparently very simple are often, as I say, very sophisticated, very complicated. I learnt about the significance of the land, and I think that's where my interest in environmental issues began to develop, and my concern that peace and environmental issues should always be linked as strongly as we can manage. We have a slogan, nothing spoils the planet like a good war. So I learnt that. I learnt a profound respect for the Aboriginal land rights struggle and what they were up against in a country like Australia, because so many people were in the cities, were far away, and they might have a vague sympathy, but they didn't really know what was happening. And I think it's probably what brought me back finally to live permanently in Australia. There are many things that stand out in my memory, but there are 2 campaigns we were involved in where I saw the courage of ordinary peace activists, and they stand out in my memory enormously. We were at Naranga, which has been closed down since then, but was a US base. We were told it was a joint facility and the second in command was an Australian. The only problem was if the American commander of the base went, he was replaced by another American, and the Australian always stayed second in command. Anyway, there we were camped in the Spinifex, which is not comfortable to camp in. Had to bring in all our water, had to sort of dig pit latrines, and every now and then there would be a scream in the night when somebody fell in because they couldn't see what they were doing. But the thing I remember most is that we sent in 3 teams to try and get into the base, and all of them had to trek with the routes we'd sorted out beforehand for quite a long period through very rough country. And they finally got to the fence, and in most cases they just sat down, blew their whistles and waited to be arrested because they were exhausted. One man did get in, and then he came out again and came back to the press conference we held the next morning, and the military denied that he'd got in. He told us enough to convince us, but he didn't have the sense to take any photographs or, take a street sign or something. But the thing I remember most was when we went and picked our people up from the police station where they'd been processed, there was one girl who kept on saying, "I didn't scream." We were crawling along and there were all kinds of police around in helicopters and motorbikes, and I walked straight into a spider's nest and I didn't scream. And she was kind of on a high and she kept on saying, "But I didn't scream." And I remembered that because I hate spiders too. And I thought, she was so brave, she did all that. And she came back and the only thing she boasted about, the rest was what you did. She said, "I didn't scream when I walked into the spider's nest." And I always loved her for that and remembered her for it. Because it's just that kind of common courage that you need. And then there was an arms exhibition in Canberra called ADEX. And again, we were camping out, this time in a car park, so we were all on sort of asphalt, and it was extremely uncomfortable. And there was very little water unless you could find friends in Canberra and so on. And there was a sort of riot police unit who used to wear blue overalls, and we could hear them come down the street because they'd go, "Hop, hop, hop." And we thought, "Oh God, they're coming again." And they weren't very gentle with us. Now, two of the lead activists decided to get married, and we negotiated a period of time in the road with the police for the wedding. And we're all there sitting in the street, and the groom's there, and the celebrant, the only one who was clean and dressed up of the lot of us, because the rest of us had been sleeping on the ground for 3 days already and were fairly sort of tired and stressed. And the bride could not be found, and she'd gone off to a blockade where some private security people had been rather nasty, and they'd tried to strengthen our blockade on that gate. So we sent out a search party and brought her back, but we went over time. And the ceremony is proceeding, but they aren't quite married yet, and we hear hop, 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 hop. Oh my God, we're out of time. And one of the clergymen who was with us, someone we're still in touch with and has now moved to Sydney and we see now and then, went on crutches because he'd been injured the day before trying to get water to one of our blockades, which had been closed off by the police, and it was very, very hot on that occasion. And he'd been sort of tackled by the police, and he was on crutches, you see. So he sort of stumbles towards this row of advancing police. Again, just such common courage. And he puts his hand up and he says, "Stop, this is a sacred ceremony of marriage." And the riot police just sort of flowed round him. And then at one crutch, he had two, but one crutch came out in the air and went circulating over the fence and into the car park where we were camped. He wasn't injured any further, and, he was back with us after he'd been processed by the police and so on. But again, that courage to sort of face a line of police coming down. And everybody else in those demonstrations showed a great deal of courage, because you never know what's going to happen. You may have decided you will be arrested because you want to make a statement, or you won't be arrested. But things happen very fast. And it's not enormous courage. We're not risking our lives. But it's sort of common everyday courage of all the people in the peace movement, and those who keep on year after year, is what I remember most about many of these episodes, and what I think sustains me most, because there are so many of these people who went before me and are coming after me in terms of age, and they're just keeping on, keeping on. I think we have to be very careful not to ask too much of people. That common courage is there, but you also have to support people and give them reasons why. You have to be respectful of the fact that they may be frightened, They may have a job, they may have children, they may have a mortgage. There's a whole range of reasons why people may not go as far as we want in the peace movement. And I think even if they can't go very far, we should praise them for what they can do. I remember one time we were at a protest, and a group of local people welcomed us, and they'd made us lovely soup. And one person made a speech saying, the soup's wonderful, but you must go, really you're not doing anything for the peace movement. You should be out there on the picket lines with us. And I got up and said, look, I love this man who's just spoken. He's really brave, but I don't think he's right. The fact that you bothered to make us soup and welcome us to your town is very important. We would like to ask you to maybe come and cheer us on and support us on the picket line. Don't get involved because you may not want to do that yet, or you might want to come and hold our hands and sit down with us and blockade the gates so that, the military can't get through. But any contribution helps, and every contribution that people make helps with a movement which is much bigger than the individuals. And those who can get arrested, those who have the courage to do it, those who have the courage just to keep on writing the letters and doing the filing and looking after the little bit of money we have, they are also essential. Those who sit on the sidelines and do nothing, very often when we are able to reach out to them, they come out. Think about the huge demonstrations against French nuclear testing. Think about the huge marches across the bridges for Aboriginal rights. The huge demonstrations before the Gulf War began that brought Sydney and other cities around the world to a standstill. Those were, to a large extent, people who had not been involved before, didn't necessarily know how to be involved because we in the peace movement had so few resources we couldn't reach out to them. But on these occasions, the media came with us and publicised. And that reached out to people, and we got hundreds of thousands of people with goodwill, and they will come again when there are issues that we can persuade the media to say this is really important for people in Australia and around the world. We need to reach out. Well, generally speaking, the media tends to ignore peace questions. If they're going to report on defence issues, as they call them, they will have a government or a Department of Defence or a military spokesperson, followed up by somebody from a different political party. And if it's Labour and Liberal, they're usually saying the same thing, or they will maybe have the Defence Association, which is funded by armaments corporations, but is seen as an independent think tank. So we have a problem that they can claim balance when they don't actually have balance, but generally peace issues are not discussed, and the underlying strategic and political questions are really not debated, and there is no debate in Parliament either, which might provoke the media to respond. They'll talk about, sort of abuse of people in the military. They'll talk about military scandals, when, money is spent and something isn't delivered. But to actually look at why that was ordered in the first place, why these billions were spent and nothing came, what lies behind that, they don't go into those kind of questions. And the struggle to get media coverage is one which is extremely difficult for the peace movement. And you actually notice the difference when they do actually publicise something like the Iraq War and the protest against it. Then, in fact, they have a profound impact and reach out to a very large number of people. But usually they don't do that. Even though, we've got 70% opposed to the war in Afghanistan or our involvement in it, up to 83% oppose any increase in military spending. But those kind of things are never publicised. It's hard to tell in Australia how far the resurgence we see in a number of other countries, which is largely focused around the austerity measures and the effects of the global financial crisis, how far that will impact here, because of course economic conditions here aren't as bad. With Get Up, it's a very interesting question, and I think there's a debate going on about it, because after all, with Get Up, all you have to do is to sit down and basically press a button. It doesn't actually bring people into activity. It doesn't bring them to meet other people in meetings in the streets, and signing petitions where you're actually face to face. And there is some concern, I know, about the sort of development of that kind of, oh, I'm an activist, I'm a member of Get Up. Well, is that really activism? Does it actually develop people? What's its relative value? And I don't think that debate is anywhere near finished. In terms of impact on governments, well, it has to be very big, and I think it has to get rather rough before they listen. I mentioned before, we're only just getting out of Afghanistan, but 70% of the Australian people have opposed Australian involvement for years. Military spending is going up, and yet up to 83% of people said that they did not support an increase in military spending in an ANU poll, which is now, I think, a couple of years old. So governments are not actually listening at the moment, but then the peace movement has a whole number of issues which tend to fragment its impact sometimes. And at the same time, it's not making an impact on government. It's not becoming a massive issue for people yet. And it needs to become that big. And as I say, it needs to have a lot of people on the streets, not just pressing buttons for Get Up. Get Up is an element of it. Online stuff is an element of it. But we also need people who are prepared to come out on the streets and say, no, I've had enough, you're not to do that anymore. And we also have to translate that into votes in elections if we're really going to change something. One thing they should do is write to local papers about what they think about things. One thing they should do is look online at what the various peace groups are doing to see if there's one they might feel comfortable about visiting, and maybe going to meetings now and then and getting involved. But in most cases, I think most people are concerned about, they've got to take the kids to footy or violin lessons or something, and they've got to go to work, and people are working longer hours and they are time poor, and we should recognise that. So that we should ask them, if we can, to keep in touch, so that when there is something like the Iraq War, we can network with them and say, we need you on this day. This time, sorry, don't go to footy with the kids, or, put the shopping off for 24 hours. We need you to come out today. And sometimes we will need them to sign a petition or, sign a Get Up thing. But we shouldn't expect them to become activists immediately. But we do need them to keep in touch with us, to be aware of what the peace movement is doing, to consider when they agree and when they want to participate in some kind of small way. And a percentage of those people, once they come in once, stay. Most go back to their ordinary pressures and stresses and concerns of living in a country like this. Well, I think they have the same problem, that the peace movement simply doesn't have the resources to reach out. The environmental movement has been more successful in that sense, but it is also true that we haven't adequately built the bridges between the environmental movement and the peace movement. I'm not suggesting that, the environmental movement has to come and sort of work on our campaigns, but we do need to have closer liaison and to inform each other, because sometimes some people from each of the two constituencies will want to support the others' campaigns or a particular action or whatever. Other things that we need to do is to do more about peace education in schools, and to find ways to reach into schools and universities and TAFEs and through the unions to young workers, to say the same thing I said before. Find out about the peace movement and keep in touch with us. That's all you need to do. We don't want you to come 24/7 peace activists. It's unrealistic. But we do want to be able to find ways to reach out to you when the high points come, and we need you to come and speak out. Well, the Sydney Peace Prize has been going for 15 years. And it's Australia's only international prize for peace. And I think that that in itself is significant and can be influential. It's awarded by a jury for someone who has done outstanding work for peace with justice. So we've linked it with child soldiers, with poverty and microcredit, with work by journalists in the field exposing the reality of appalling crimes against sort of human rights around the world. So it contributes to people understanding that peace is a very complex and sort of multifarious concept. It's not just the absence of violence, it's much more than that. You can have no fighting, but you don't have peace if people are starving, or if their human rights are being affected. So that's another value of it in itself. The events which are held in November each year mean that the question of the value of peace and acknowledging the importance of peacemakers or peace workers becomes something in the media once a year. It's not a lot, but it's a contribution to making people aware of the significance of peace and how precious it is, how important it is. The events also involve a schools festival that can bring up to 1,500 school-age children from a variety of schools, public, private, religious-based ones and so on. They all come together in one school, and there's a big event with the release of doves and a visit to a peace garden and so forth. And that focus on school children is also part of the work of the Peace Foundation, which awards the Peace Prize, because the foundation does work in schools around peace education. It's very much pupil-centred and pupil-driven. It may deal with bullying or racism. It may deal with a situation overseas or a situation in Australia. The students choose that themselves, and they drive the projects. The Peace Foundation people are really the backup and in the French sense, the animators of it. So all those things seem to us to have value in themselves, and that's why we keep going with the Peace Prize. It's hard because I see things changing, it's a process. And I don't want to paint a picture which is static. I'm not going to see what I would like to see. But at the same time, I am given confidence by seeing things that move us towards that. But the world I would like to see does not have the dominance of money, of capital, of profit-making that we have now. That there is a very fundamental reorganisation which ensures a number of things. That poverty is not a thing that increases for women, but is in fact gradually eliminated. That people have sufficient sustenance. And sustenance means clean water, food, a decent house, education, democracy, access to culture, access to books. All those kind of things are what are necessary if a human being is to be able to realise their potential. Whatever that is. It may be something stunning, it may be something very ordinary, because most of us are both unique and fairly ordinary. But so many people around the world, and particularly women, are too poor to have access to much of that. And around the world there is so much injustice, there is so much violence, most of which is conflict over resources, conflict over control of resources which can be exploited and sold for profit. And I want to see a world where that has changed and things are produced according to people's needs to the extent that a society can achieve that. And people are allowed to grow and flower as much as possible. And I think that will be a much more enjoyable world. It'll be a much richer world. But I think it will be very difficult to achieve. And as I say, I don't expect to see it in my lifetime. Doesn't mean to say I won't go on working for it. But I don't think it's a pipe dream. I think that there is a big struggle ahead of us to achieve that world of social justice and fairness. I believe it's possible. I regret that I may not see it in my lifetime. But I've just remembered a poem which talks about, she calls it, it's an English woman, Alice Meynell from the 1930s. She's actually talking about socialism, and she says, you know, day by day it opens and day by day it grows. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'd forgotten. It's a very moving poem, so I better not finish on that. I'll finish a different way. I can't quote it because she goes on comparing it to a rose. I'm sorry, I have no idea where that came from. Start again, right. Okay. So I don't think that this new world will happen in my lifetime, but I am convinced it is both necessary and possible. And I think it will be a world which will be more fun, more enjoyable, much richer in what it achieves in terms of peace, our environment, the lives of ordinary men and women. And that's what I would like to see in our world.